Welcome to Money and Media, presented by FinCon. My name is Andy Hill, and today we're going to be talking about how to create smart goals for your podcast. I'm happy to be joined today by Lindsay Tjepkema, who is the CEO and co-founder of Casted, the first and only marketing platform built around branded podcasts. With more than 15 years of experience in B2B marketing, including running her own consulting agency, she's a dynamic leader who's had tremendous success building and growing marketing teams on a local and global level. And with podcasting surging year over year, podcasting is a marketing medium we cannot ignore as small business owners in this FinCon community. Well, welcome to the show, Lindsay.
Thanks. I am so happy to be here. I'm a podcast about podcasts. It's my jam. I'm ready.
It's like a dream within a dream, right?
It is all day long. Yes.
Very cool. Well, let's talk about how you got your start in podcasting. How does somebody get started in the podcasting business like you? How'd you do that?
Well, first of all, I feel like I should turn the tables around and be asking you the questions. So I'll try to not do that. But yeah, so my background's in marketing, as you just mentioned. I spent my whole career in marketing, and most recently I was at a global enterprise SaaS business running brand and content. And said, hey, we're this 19-year-old company and we're literally missing a voice, literally and figuratively. So used some of my budget to launch a podcast, and in doing so, quickly realized what you probably have, which is it's a really great way to connect with your audience. And for us, our audience was yes, external, but also internal. So we had this global team around the world that we were able to connect with and give them a way to use conversation to connect with our current and potential customers. But that also, there wasn't a whole lot of technology made for me as a B2B marketer. It was kind of made for other use cases, kind of the solo podcaster or like the hobbyist. So that's how we got to Casted. That's how I got into podcasting, and then how Casted got its start. So
that makes a lot of sense. So how does a brand, or I guess anybody really who's looking to sell something, not come across in too much of a salesy manner and still keep that purity of the original, podcast form where you're, telling stories and helping people out? How do you balance that?
I think it's like you said, it's storytelling. We've all heard that analogy of like when you go to a party, nobody likes to talk to the person who just sits there talking about themselves the whole time. They want to be with the most interesting person in the room, which is a great storyteller and is interested in the other person. So same thing goes for any conversation that goes with podcasting. So have a great conversation that other people would be compelled to listen in on, and then, invite them in on it, invite them to listen in on that conversation that you're having, and just authenticity, right? It's not about you, it's about your listener, it's about your audience.
Yeah, that's a good thing to remember for everybody. So let's talk about podcasting over other traditional marketing mediums. Obviously, there's lots of ways to get out there with your business, but why is podcasting, I guess, the marketing medium of choice lately, for you at least? Yeah,
so, okay, again, career in marketing, and the playbook that we've all been raised on is blogging, right? Written content. Create a blog. From that blog, create some gated content, compel people to click on CTAs and download that content and get into a nurture stream. And then, by the time you're done with all of that and that, volume game and that quantity game, in your abundant spare time, also create podcasts and perhaps video content, because that's what your audience really, really wants. So make sure you do that too. While your audience really wants that rich content, we're not focusing on that. Actually, a couple of years ago, I flipped that on its side and said, what if we looked at this differently? What if instead of trying to go and create all this written content, because that's what the playbooks have told us that we need, what if we started first with a conversation like you and I are doing now, turned that into rich content, into podcast and video. And then from there, turned this content into additional written content to supplement this conversation and to really wring out all the value. I think more and more as people see that that's not only what audiences want and are interested in, because if somebody listens to this conversation, they might want to go deeper and dig into some of the things that you and I talk about. It's also more efficient and more effective and a way to run your marketing team that gets you more for less as far as, investment of time and energy is concerned. So if you finally get time with a subject matter expert, you really want to get as much value out of it as possible. And I think it makes the most sense to do exactly what we're doing right now.
Yeah, I guess, is the reason that we solely focused on the writing side of things, or more focused on the writing side of things, is from an SEO perspective? And then I guess if that's the case, then how do we battle that for podcasting? How do we get found?
So to me, the first time I started and contributed to a blog was back in, 2008, 2009, because that's what you had. We couldn't have done this back then. Streaming was not a thing. This would have been a major feat that would have required lots and lots of production to put together. This was before the days of YouTube, right? And so now we have those capabilities. Those options are at our fingertips, yet the playbooks remain from before we had those things, when all we had was blogging and the recipe for success was SEO. That's what we did. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't do that. I absolutely think you should. Casted has a blog. We do a lot of written content. But it's time to rethink the way our priorities and how and why we're doing things. And are we creating a blog because we know our audience really well and they really like written content? Okay, that's true. But are we doing it just because that's what we've been told to do for the last, decade and a half? Then maybe not, right? So I think, it's simply a holdover. It's legacy. It's what we've always done. And so I think it's time to really start thinking about who's it for and why we're doing it.
Let's talk about it. Okay, well, let's talk about people who are interested in starting a podcast, and let's talk about goals, because I know you are all about SMART goals. I saw that in your blog. So let's talk about the importance of setting goals before you launch a podcast.
Yeah. So again, who's it for? Why are you doing it? I am a broken record with that. I think with a podcast or with anything else you do, it's who is it for and why are you doing it? Because podcasting, it's really easy to say, we need a podcast. We need a podcast. It's really hot right now. Everybody's doing it. We need a podcast. If you're a marketer representing a brand, your CEO might come to you and say that. Some of your customers might come to you and say that. So it's always important to take a pause and say, okay, who is this going to be for? Is it an internal podcast? Is it for our external audience? Is it for our current customers? Is it for this specific segment within our target audience? Who is it for? And then why are you doing it? Is it to educate? Is it to entertain? Is it to increase engagement, right? Is it to get your current customers using your product or service more? Is it to educate your sales force or your consultants or whoever might be out on the front lines? Then and only then can you really start to figure out, okay, what are our goals? Are we looking at how many people are listening? Are we looking at how many interviews this turns into? Are we turning into how can we measure success based on who it's for and why we're doing it? And then that also gets into the format of the show. Should it be an interview? Who should we even interview? Who should we say no to? Yeah, really, you need to start there and cannot really move on until you have those two main questions answered.
Yeah, those are good questions to start with. It sounds like for a lot of things, including podcasts. So let's talk about, you started to dive into a little bit of, the metrics side of the goals. I've heard you guys talk about not focusing on downloads that much. The main metric that everybody talks about with the Holy Grail, right? Why is that? Why should we not be focusing on that? And if so, what else should we be focusing on?
Right. Okay. So number of downloads. Let's see. Jay Bear came on to our podcast early on and said something that I use all the time because I love it. You cannot pay your team in downloads, right? What's that going to do? And is it helpful? Sure. Is it a piece of the puzzle? Sure. But is it the indicator of success for your podcast, let alone your brand or marketing strategy? No. And that's because typically number of downloads just means that your device, as an audience member, simply downloaded the episode. That could be because you subscribed 6 months ago and you've been downloading ever since, but you never listened. It could be because you downloaded once and listened 536 times, you just don't know. You lose that information. All you know is number of downloads. Number of downloads doesn't mean a whole lot. What should you be listening for? What should you be looking at? And to me, it's what are the indicators of engagement? So even if it's a low number of downloads, how can I tell that people are engaged and excited about my content and therefore my brand? To me, the only way you can get that information is if you own your audience. So Apple, Spotify, Google, YouTube, they're all really, really, really great platforms. They're great megaphones. They are free, at least in the monetary sense. They are really great platforms to take your show and to take your content and to get in front of a lot of people. It's awesome. Don't stop doing it. However, if that is your only path to accessing your audience and to getting your content in front of people that you want to engage with your brand, you lose a lot of control. Instead, what if when you have a chance to send somebody to your show, you send them to your own website, you bring them to your owned real estate, if you will, you invite them to your house. Because then once they're there, you have a much better understanding of what they're doing, how they're behaving there, what else they're consuming. So are they listening to your show? How much of it? Are they listening to different clips? Are they clicking around? Are they coming back over and over again? Are they listening to other episodes? Are they consuming other content, like your blog content, going back to that written content? Are they digging in deeper to that conversation by exploring other content, clicking through to register for your event? So what else are they doing? If your podcast is that doorway, what are they doing when they come in? How can you use your podcast on your own media, on your own real estate to really own that experience? And then from there, you can start to dig into all kinds of information because you own that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you tailor the experience once they're there already. That makes a lot of sense. So let's talk about some reasons that maybe podcasts don't stick around. And I know that I heard the numbers are pretty large. I'll probably butcher the statistics, but I know that a lot of them start per year and somewhere close to like 40% or 50% fade away. What is the reason there's such a large fade away for podcasts?
It's a lot of work. I mean, it's not super easy. It's not something you can do in 15 minutes a week, at least not well. It takes effort. It takes energy. It takes some expertise. It takes finding, first of all, it takes understanding who it's for, understanding your audience really, really well. It takes understanding why you're doing it and what your goals are, and then constantly finding people to come on and support that effort and that purpose. It takes a little bit of research to make sure that the conversation you have is a good one and is going to be interesting to the listeners that you want to be engaging in that content. Scheduling, actually having the interview, recording it, doing the post-production, and then what are you going to do with it from there? So if you're really getting as much value out of it as possible, you're not simply stopping with publishing it, you're wringing it out, you're creating other content from it. So it's, for many people, it is a shift in the way they're quote unquote doing marketing and kind of approaching their strategy. And also it's time consuming, especially if you're trying to crank out that high volume of written content and then tack this on at the end. So I think a lot of people jump into it thinking that, especially because the podcasts that they know and love seem so effortless, it's like an Olympic skier. It's like, I could do that. I could totally just ski down that hill and jump off that cliff. And so you hear a really great podcast and it sounds effortless. And it's like, well, if they can make it sound this great, if Alex, on Gimlet Media, if Alex Bloomberg is making it sound so amazing, I can probably do it okay. But then they get into it and realize it's a lot of work. And so that's not to scare anyone away, but it's just to say, hey, it should be all the more reason it should be the center of your strategy, not something tacked on to the end.
Sure. And then maybe the need or the thought that you'd get some immediate results in podcasting might be a part of it as well. Do you think so as well?
100%. I think a lot of people, and I hear it all the time, see podcasting as a demand gen tool, as an immediate lead gen tool, as something that's just going to be a magnet to leads. And that's not how it works. I don't even believe that's how it should work. Should it generate leads over time? Yes. Should it build your audience? Absolutely. Should it raise awareness and engagement? 100%. But it's not going to happen overnight. You have to build your audience. You have to grow a following. And then from there, keep being compelling so that people really build a relationship and build trust and build a connection with you, and therefore want to learn more and want to be a part of what you're doing. It takes time.
Well, let's talk about growing that following, because I know a lot of people start their shows and they're like, I've got good content. I'm editing it perfectly. It just sounds great. I cannot get it to grow. What are some smart ways to promote your podcast?
Yeah. So again, start with a great conversation and ring it out, kind of work backwards from there. So after you've created that podcast, after you've had that conversation, look for ways to ring it out and create supplemental content from it. So let's say from this podcast, we spin out 2 or 4 blog posts, not just because we can, but because there's really good information in there, and we kind of break it up into a few different parts and really dig deeper. And from this kind of high level conversation, maybe you supplement it with some how-tos and some really tactical information that somebody can dive deeper into, or some steps or tips, something they can print out, something they can work with, a way for people to dive deeper. And also, if they stumble upon that, maybe they want to work backwards and come listen to the podcast, right? Also, how are you taking clips from the show and sharing it in smaller chunks? So how are you taking clips and sharing them on social media? And again, usually your network on social media is a little bit larger than your podcast following, especially as you get started. So how are you using that content across other marketing channels to get it in front of more people in a way that's valuable? And how are you using clips in email, right? As part of your email strategy that you have already to make that channel more compelling and more engaging. So again, I think just like with any other part of marketing that you lean into, how can you turn them sideways and look at them from different angles and say, how else can I use this? How can I use parts of this across other marketing channels to get in front of more people and to serve more people? Again, who's it for? Why are you doing it? And how does it add value? Just continue to ask yourself that question. Look for more ways to be compelling across in other places.
I think that's great. And to get more meta with you, I mean, this show right now, you and I are recording via video. So we're going to have that become a YouTube piece. We're going to write a really compelling blog piece out of what we're talking about. And then we're going to have this podcast. So right away, automatically, we're getting 3 pieces of content. But to your point, what can you do to then create like a freebie out of this that draws people back into the content, or draw people in from the blog post back to the podcast? So I love that. That helps out a lot. Thank you very much for going through that detail. Another part of having a podcast is creating that engagement, creating that community where you feel like this person is out for your good and they are, you're listening to them every day. How can we foster that community with our podcast? What ways can we do that? And I know it's good to get off of the platforms that are owned by somebody else and back onto our own. How can we do that, and how can we create that community?
Yeah, a few different ways. I mean, lots of different ways, I guess, especially once you know who you're doing it for. It kind of all depends on who that audience is. But one of the ways that, one of the things that we do is that we use Drift chatbot, right? And it's very open. It's very obvious that it's a chatbot because we use Podcat, which is our mascot. So if you come to our website, you chat with a cat, which is obviously not a human because it's a cartoon cat. And so that's a way to say like, hey, if you're here and you're listening and you have a question, like, we're here and this is your gateway to kind of like knock and say, hey, I have a question, or I liked this interview that you did. And that actually shows up on the podcast pages. And then also in the reverse of that, when you come to the site, you're kind of greeted by that, and you receive some recommendations about, hey, if you're searching for this, you might be interested in X, Y, and Z on our podcast. Another thing that we've done is we've actually literally created a community called Marketers with Mics. It's a Slack community that it's that who is it for? It's for marketers that are involved in a podcast. And so we talk about podcasting, and we talk about the show, and we talk about their shows, and we invite them to talk to each other about shows. And so consider even going to yet another channel to kind of talk about what it is that you're talking about on the podcast. And again, to your point about not being salesy, if it makes sense and if it serves the audience to say, hey, we have this thing here too, it might, this might answer the question that you have. And then I guess another thing that I would say is simply ask as part of your show, as part of the episode, hey, if this information was helpful for you, we'd love to hear from you. We would love to know more. I think the days of asking for a review are starting to become very, very expected. So what else could you do? What else could you ask? What other kind of feedback or advice or guidance or expertise could you ask for just within the conversation? Because then your most engaged listeners are going to raise their hand and ask to be more involved.
I love that. Can I get nitty gritty with you on your community side of things with Slack? Why do you choose Slack versus something like Facebook? Is it because of Facebook owning too much of the data? Is that why?
For us, it's that I sound like such a broken record. It's who is it for? And our audience of marketers is very much Slack centric. We work a lot in the, software as a service, SaaS space, and it's just a ubiquitous channel is Slack, and it's very easy. It's free. You can just spin it right up. And we do have a website, it's marketerswithmics.com, but it sends you to Slack. Facebook, our audience being B2B and mid-market to enterprise, typically companies that we work with, don't tend to hang out in a professional mindset on Facebook. Now, that's not the case for everyone. That's definitely not one size fits all advice. If that's where your target audience is, by all means, a Facebook page or a Facebook group or a Facebook, whatever situation it may be, might be perfect. I actually know I was on another podcast that Momnesia, it was about mom business leaders, and they have a very strong following on Facebook. And so that's kind of where their whole community is. So again, that's why it's so important, to your point, to know your audience. Where do they consume not only content, but the content that you put out? Because if you reach someone that spends a lot of time on Facebook, but only when they're in a personal mindset, and you're trying to reach them when they're thinking about work, they're going to tune you out.
All right. Well, you are an industry insider in podcasting, and I think this is a lot of fun to talk to you about this. Where do you see podcasting going in the near term with regard to growth? And I guess what needs to happen to the industry to help it grow even further?
Yeah. I think right now, especially in the midst of everything that's going on, and we're looking for ways to connect with our audiences digitally and online, and regardless of whether or not we can be together at events or conferences, podcasting is an incredible way to create connections, to strengthen connections, regardless of where each member is geographically speaking and where they are physically located. And that is not the reason. It is just all the more reason that podcasting is blowing up. Before any of this happened, the reason I started Casted was because our audiences, if you look at any of the data about listenership, it is a hockey stick. It is just exploding with podcasting. Everyone's listening to podcasts. Yes, entertainment podcasts, the murder podcasts and the fun podcasts started. They started the wave, but where your audience is, where the listeners go, where your audience spends their time, so too go the marketers. That's where the brands go, because we as marketers want to be where our audiences are, rightfully so. That's what we just finished talking about. And as the most forward-thinking brands have already realized this, and so they're the ones who have jumped on podcasting soon, and we're already seeing it happening, everyone else will start to follow. And it's those that seek first to create connection and to really serve their audiences, they're going to be the ones that own this space. And it feels like everyone has a podcast, but it is early enough for the first brands to really own their space of podcast land. So if you get in there now and you do it right, and you create really great content that doesn't talk about yourself, that isn't all sales minded, isn't pitchy, it truly aims to serve, those brands are going to win. And so that's not only what I think, that's what I'm already seeing, is more and more brands moving to that. And as a result, rethinking the rest of their marketing. Yes, especially now in the time of rethinking event strategies and conference strategies, but also, my blog, do I need to be blogging every day? Do I need to be blogging, this much, or this word count? Maybe not. Maybe I need to keep doing it because that's not because SEO and not because playbooks and not because that's the way I've been told to do it all along, but because it's the right thing to do. And that's how my audience actually wants to consume some of my content. I think really we're in a time of asking, what does my audience actually want? Which is great. And I think right now, rich content like podcasts and video is what a lot of people have said and are demonstrating through the data that that's how they want to consume content.
So let's give it to them, right?
Let's give it to them.
I love it. I love it. Lindsay, Thank you so much for your time today. Where's the best place for people to learn more about you, check out Casted, and then listen to the podcast if it's helpful?
For sure. So casted.us is our website. It's casted.us. The podcast is the Casted podcast. It's very, very clever. And then you can find us on Twitter at Go Casted, and I'm Casted Lindsay. So, and then Marketers with Mics, if that really resonates and is the right fit for anybody, marketerswithmics.com is a great place to plug into others.
Yeah, that seems like a great community for a lot of people who are podcasting that want to grow their business and collaborate with fellow marketers to take advantage of this hockey stick, right? So,
absolutely.
Lindsay, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's great to be here.